So I talked to people this week and was like, so, if you'd never been to a church before, and they were like, hey, some 31-year-old is going to tell you all the stuff he's learned in his life, what would you think? And the average response I got was, followed by like, oh, that's cute. I remember being 31. Here's my hope this morning. Two things. One, my hope is that maybe, I don't think I'm going to teach anything new, so just throwing that out there. My hope is that I can help you see something a little differently, or maybe just that I haven't been jaded by the world yet, and so maybe they'll give a different view that way. This may not be good, but it won't be boring. So I just want to throw that out there up front, so that way it's on the internet, everyone knows it. These are some of the things I've learned in 31 years. Some of them are, well, we're just going to get into it. The first thing is this. I think I've learned one of the best things you can do in life is ask great questions. Would you agree? Jesus, in his time, in the Bible that we recorded, 183 times people asked him a question. How many times did he answer them? Yeah, instead what Jesus regularly did is he would ask a question in response. Jesus asked 307 questions. So did Jesus ask, or did he get asked more questions? Isn't that interesting? Do you think there's something to that? Now, meanwhile, the average 4-year-old, 437 questions a day on average. 200 of those, I think, are just why. But the other 237, here's my question. So 4 years old, you asked on average 437 questions. If you took out the, hey, how's it going, how you doing, stuff that aren't really real questions, how many questions do you think you now ask a day? And my answer is a very low number, single digits for sure, because I have a personal assistant in my pocket that will answer any question I can come up with no shame whatsoever, right? And I love that. But I think something's missing when we no longer ask each other questions. Would you agree? And I think we actually get to this place where we can't learn anything new if we don't ask questions. Here's an example of what Jesus would do. Somebody came up to Jesus and said, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" And Jesus' response is, "Why do you ask me what is good?" Isn't that great? He asks an ethical question back. Well, why do you think I know what good is? Or he also says this, his disciples answered, "Where can we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd?" Problem identifier, right? There's all these people. Where are we going to get enough bread to feed everybody? And Jesus says, whoa. What do you have right now? How many loaves do you have? And they went on to feed the whole crowd. And so this is what Jesus would do. He'd get asked a question, and his response would be to ask a question back. And I think there's some amount of wisdom to this. Would you agree? I think there's some wisdom to that. In chemistry class in high school, I learned something, not chemistry. I don't remember anything about that. But one thing I do remember is there was this particular section of chemistry where I was really struggling. And so there was this one test I took, and I failed it. And the teacher was like, "Oh, you can take it again." So I took it again and failed it again. And then it was just me and him at that point. He's like, "Here, come here. Are you sure you want to put that answer here?" And I think it was at this point I realized maybe there was some favoritism here. And I was like, "Well, but I don't understand." He goes, whoa. Why are you trying to understand it? Just do it. And I learned something that day. You don't always have to understand something to do it, right? And I think that's what great questions allow us to do. It allows me to ask someone something, and they tell me a response, and I may not understand it, but if I'm wise, I probably will do it anyway. If you could look back 10 years and tell yourself one thing, do you think 10 years ago you would understand it? But would you do it? Would you hope they'd do it? There's something to that, in my opinion. I think one of the best things you can do if you strive to be mature is to ask questions of people that are ahead of you in life, because I think they have something to teach us. But I also think that people that are younger than us also have something to teach us. If I didn't think that was true, I wouldn't be standing here at 31 telling you guys what I've learned in my life, right? I think that everyone has something to teach us if we're willing to listen. Most of the time, I'm just not interested. And so I think asking great questions is a great way to do this. When I fail to ask questions, I'm convinced I limit my ability to learn. But when I ask great questions, I often gain a new and fresh perspective. So what I did is I asked some people, and then I came up with some myself. These are some of my favorite questions. And there's this saying about questions, that there's no such thing as what? So here's what I believe, because I think sometimes we're just politically correct and not honest. There's no such thing as a dumb question or a stupid question. That may be true, but that doesn't mean that there aren't bad questions. Would you agree? If not, Junior high meets Monday evenings. We'd love for you to join them. They've got a bunch of questions for you. So here's some questions we put together that I kind of got these from a bunch of different sources. One of my favorite questions to ask people is, how's that working for you? It's kind of subtly mean. Right? Like, I did this and this and this. How's that working for you? Terrible. Great, we can work with that. What's the deeper thing? If there's somebody that just constantly won't stop talking and you like get closer to them to like kind of hint it and they don't stop, what does like that kid want? Attention, absolutely. Sometimes it's great to ask yourself this question. The person that drives you nuts, what's the deeper thing? They're probably not malicious, right? They're probably doing it because of something else, some deeper thing that we don't think about. And it's so much more easy just not to ask these questions, but it's a good one. What was that like for you? And can you tell me more about that? I'm married to a therapist. Those are the two therapist questions they love to ask. Can you tell me more about that? What was that like for you? Tell me more about that. What do you want to be when you grow up? Everyone still is growing up, right? So what do you want to be when you grow up? I love this question. For some people it's this, it's retired, right? Is anybody looking forward to one day being retired? That was an underwhelming response compared to what I expected. I can't wait to retire someday, hopefully, at the age of 93. It's going to be great. What makes you the most angry? I love asking people that are trying to figure out what they should be doing this question. When it comes to like helping students try and figure out what they should do with their lives, a lot of times people ask like, well, what are you good at? What do you like? Those are good questions. But oftentimes what makes you the most angry is a real clear indicator of where passion lies. You know what I mean? So I love that question. One of my favorite bad questions that I ask people all the time is like, how you doing? Or how was your day? You ever ask somebody how your day was and they just say one word answer? Fine, good, meh, And if the younger the person is, sometimes I think the less it's an actual word. Like, a better question is, tell me a fun fact about your day. Tell me two things that made today awesome. Tell me, I don't know, there's all sorts of fun. This is also my wife's, I don't think this is a therapy question, I hope, but she loves to ask people, what would your last meal be if you were on death row? My answer, something that's out of season, right? So then hopefully you can wait long. Nobody else? Yes, okay. And then this is the Jeff Stimple contribution. If you could talk to yourself 10 years ago, what would you say? I already asked you that one, so that's not fair. These are some examples that I have found of good questions. There's a gazillion good questions out there. And one of the things I've learned is if you want to be more mature, you got to ask great questions. And you get way further with a question than you do with an answer. You know what I mean? So that's thing one. Thing two, the importance of asking for help. We know this is true, that no one accomplishes anything significant alone. And there's an old proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go how? Together. And there should be really no place that this is more true than in the church. Matter of fact, in the Bible, it talks about do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but instead to what? Interests of others. So how should your interests get met? I should be looking out for them. And how should my interests get met? Yeah, but here's the problem. At some point in the past, you've tried to make that work and someone let you down, right? And that makes you just start to go, or here's another one. This is I feel like if there was a Josh Huckabee slogan for asking for help because I'm so bad at it, this is my number one. It's like, well, it's just easier if I do it myself. Does anybody else feel that way? It'd just be easier if I could do it faster and I would know it's done the way that it's supposed to be, right? Anybody else can relate? And here's the problem with that. Then everything stays the same. And you die making it stay the same, which is kind of discouraging. When we were first married, there was a point where I felt like Karen wasn't contributing enough, which, can I just tell you, if you're married in this room and you ever think your spouse isn't contributing enough, you're wrong. But I felt like, and Karen finally was like, fine, I'll take over all the cooking. And I was like, okay. But when I make the chicken, I like it, and some, you know what, I got it. And she's like, see? This is why you don't have any help. You won't accept it. Is anyone else like me? Is anyone else like the martyr? It's like, why is no one helping me? Because you won't let them. Even Jesus asked for help. He would withdraw regularly to pray. And if you've read about in the Bible at different points and read about the disciples that followed Jesus, you'd pray too. And then in Garden of Gethsemane, he goes on, he takes 3 guys with him further into the garden where he's praying before he's about to die. It's this incredible moment of him and praying to God, and he stay here and keep watching me. Jesus asked for help. Jesus asked for help. Josh definitely needs help. And yet I'm so bad at asking for it, but I got to remember, and it's important to know that you've got to ask for help if you want to do significant stuff. You cannot do it by yourself. You've got to have other people join with you. Does that make sense? That's thing 2 that I've learned. Thing 3 that I've learned, never buy the cheapest version of anything. Does anyone have a story for this one? So these are some things that helmets. If you're going to buy a thin piece of plastic to protect your brain, spend a little bit of money, right? If you're going to get a tattoo, this is a real adult one, but good insurance is important. Would you agree? Yeah, okay. How about good brakes? I'm amazed when people are like, well, what's the cheapest one? These are brake pads. These are the things. You save $6, Larry, but you die. Like, come on, they're brakes. Dental work. Enough said. iPhone charge. Has anybody else just had a chronic case of like iPhone charge and then it dies or it splits or it breaks? And shoes. You ever bought the cheapest pair of shoes? Think they're $10 cheaper. I'll buy these. And then like a month later, you're back buying the same $20 pair. And if you just bought the $30 pair. Paint. I have a friend. When he was a kid growing up, his parents were like, we're going to get the entire inside of the house painted. He was young. They painted it white. And they saved a couple $100 by using the water-soluble paint. Which means if a mark gets on the wall, you can't, because what'll happen? You'll pull the paint up. They saved like $300. Worth it. Trash bags. Come on. Has anyone ever carried a bag of trash and then how much money would you pay to not be in that situation? Infinite, right? Spend the extra $1.50. This is something I've learned. Never buy the cheapest version of something. And also, sounds like there's a story there and I have no desire to hear it. So never buy the cheapest version of something. Also, never buy the most expensive version of something. Can we just have a heart-to-heart for a second? Butter. Are you kidding me? There is like name brand and generic butter. It's all butter. Or bleach. Bleach is my favorite. You'll see people in the aisles comparing bleach. Guess what's in bleach? How is Clorox doing this? Hey, this generic one, $2 full of bleach, it'll bleach stuff, but this Clorox one, $4.50, and it bleaches stuff. I'll do the Clorox. Really? Flour. It's flour. I'm sorry. But my favorite one is bottled water. What's Evian backwards? Naive, and I love that. I think that is hilarious. It's water. I talked to somebody last night. They're like, no, listen. And if you have fancy bottled water in here, good for you. Somebody was like, why would you pay more for bottled water? And this is what he said. He goes, yeah, it's on the table. I see it. He was like, why would you pay more for this? He said, well, it's got minerals. So does the water from the hose. I didn't know that was important to you. I got all kinds of minerals. Fifth thing I've learned. There was this guy. His name's Mark Roper. He got like a YouTube channel. He made a video. He took 10 wallets and lost them in each of these cities and Disneyland. And he did this study. He wanted to know how many people would call and try and return the wallet. If you find a wallet that has an address, you can put it in the mailbox and it'll get mailed back to the person for free. Do you know that? No forever stamp needed. And so they filled these wallets intentionally with what looks like a bunch of money with a picture of a sonogram so that there would seem like some emotional attachment to it. And there was all this stuff that he did, and there was a phone number. And basically he wanted to know the average person in these major cities, would they return the wallet? He also picks a couple Canadian cities, and if you'll notice, there's a couple cities you probably don't recognize, like Hill City, South Dakota, Parma, Idaho, and New London, Connecticut. He wanted to know in those cities, and Nashua, Iowa, because it's a smaller town, would people be more likely to turn the wallets in? So 10 wallets, each city, They put 5 in the wealthier areas. They put 5 in the not as wealthy areas. They put some in women's bathrooms, some in men's bathrooms to see if men or women were more likely to return it. The one thing that was kind of unique is in Vegas, rather than doing more wealthy and less wealthy, they did 5 on the Strip and they did 5 out in the residential areas of Vegas. Here's my question. Which city do you think returned the fewest of the 10 wallets? No. So Disneyland was really interesting because they kept turning them into security guards, and after the second one, the security guards noticed they were all identical, and they called the guy and were like, stop doing this. So the mouse mafia is a real thing. What else? Fewest. Who? What? Detroit. Who said Detroit? You are on the money. 3 returned. 30%. Here's the results. New York City, 4 wallets. 5 wallets, Seattle, LA, Miami, Dallas, Edmonton. 6 wallets, Huntsville, which is one of the, and New London, which is one of the smaller ones. 7 wallets, San Fran, Winnipeg, Parma. 10 wallets, Chicago. There is no way. I lived there 3.5 years. There's no stinking way. And yet they did. All 5 wallets in the Las Vegas Strip were all returned. Every single one of them. No one took a dollar out of the wallet. Every single one of them, when they called and they said, hey, we found your missing wallet, they said, is there any money in it? Just because they wanted to know if the person would lie. And every single person they called, they did not have one person that took the money. There were some people that didn't return the wallets, but nobody took the money. And what was incredible is actually in some of the lower income areas, they had several people call that were homeless and returned the wallets and didn't touch the money. Isn't that incredible? And he said all that to say this: we have more in common than we do dividing us. And I'll just tell you this, because I'm convinced of it. There's a lot of people that I look at and I think, you're different than me. And in that difference, I think it's a me versus you mentality, and I don't want to engage you. But here's what's interesting. I think that's a media thing. I think the media has tried to teach us that we need to be afraid. And I'm not convinced that's true. And many of the people that are wildly different from you may be the people that you have a lot in common with and could teach you a whole bunch. I'm really convinced we have more in common than we do dividing us. Now, you have this verse in the Bible that says this: if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at what? Peace with everyone. Can I tell you how I've fulfilled this biblical command thus far? Avoid difficult people. It's really easy. If you avoid people that are difficult, peace, right? And not just with them, with you. Do you think that's what they meant when they wrote that down? No, and I think it's important to remember, we have more in common than we do dividing us, which means even the people that drive you nuts, those are the people you're supposed to live at peace with. And it will start with realizing they aren't that different from you, even if they may seem like it. Does that make sense? That was, I think, 4 or 5, I don't know, counting's never been my strong suit. Here's the next thing, the importance of trying new things. So every 7 years, your taste buds change. Do you know that? Do you remember, like as a kid, there was a food you hated that you might now love? For me, it was onions. Okay. Also, there are 50 to 75-ish trillion cells in your body. Typically, every 7 to 10 years, every cell is brand new. There are actually some cells that don't reproduce or replicate. Many of them live in the brain stem and where the spinal cord meets the brain. But overall, most of the cells in your body, skin cells, hair follicles, they are all replaced every 7 to 10 years. So in theory, you're almost an entirely new person compared to who you were 10 years ago. Not just like metaphorically, literally. Except I think the bones are the same. Fashion trends. Does anybody else watch a fashion trend that used to be popular come back around? Guys, hold on to your clothes. You're sitting on a gold mine. Let them go out of style, hang on to them, and you can sell them for a huge markup. In 20 years, it'll be great. Do you know how often they now say technology? How long does it take for your technology to go out of date? 9 seconds, that's right. No, do you really know? It used to be 3 years. It's now down to 9 months, which means you could have a new child and also be technologically out of date in the same amount of time. But they're saying that their guess is within 3 years it'll be cut in half. It'll be 4.5 months. Your technology will be immediately out of date again. Isn't that crazy? So all of these things are true. They're all changing. You're changing. Culture's changing. We get this, right? So when's the last time you tried something new? When's the last time? Is anybody else like me? You go to a restaurant and you act like, no, I'm going to get something different this time. And then like you eventually, the waiter comes, there's that pressure, you feel the sweat, and you're like, the steak. It's what you always got every time. No, just me. That's what I figured. So I do that every time. And here's the deal. What is it about me? I have an aversion to trying new stuff. I like things kind of the way they are. Does anybody else like me? Here's what I've learned. It is to my detriment to keep everything the same. It is absolutely, but it is to my detriment to do that. I'm actually convinced that one of the best questions you can answer today is, what are you currently learning about? And is it something you already know? Like, what are you learning about in addition to everything else? Like, just you. How are you making yourself new? I think there's a pendulum that exists, and on one hand you have growth, and on the other hand you have comfort, and you can't have both. You can't be growing and comfortable. And so I found this cool little picture. It's when God wants you to grow, He makes you a little uncomfortable. And they shoved a gigantic fish into a bowl, which, by the way, I think that fish is fake, so like no animal cruelty stuff here, but I'm pretty sure. But this is so true, right? It takes discomfort to make us grow sometimes. When's the last time you tried something new? I want to tell you a parable that I found. It's one of my favorites. And this isn't one that Jesus said, it's just another one I found. And here's how the parable goes. There was this priest, and this priest would hold these weekly meditations. And during the meditations, when they're, of course, very quiet and inward focused, there was this cat. And when everyone's trying to be really, really quiet, the cat is, making tons of noise and being super distracting. And run all around, make all this noise. So eventually, the priest had this idea. And before meditations would begin, he would go and take a rope and tie the cat to a tree. Right? So then the next week, meditation time came, and before they started meditating, what did the priest do? Tie the cat to the tree. And eventually, some years later, the priest passed away. And the disciples of the priest continued to hold those meditations. And the first thing that they would do to start the time of meditation was what? Tie the cat to the tree. Well, one day the cat died. So the disciples then went into town to buy a what? Because they needed the cat to do what? Because in order to do meditation, you have to start by. That's right. So then 7 cats later, the tree dies. So they go into town to buy a, because in order to start meditation. And 16 generations later, some of the experts came out and started writing of the spiritual impact and significance of tying cats to trees and how that impacts your meditation. Do you get the point? Yeah. We've got to try new stuff, guys. We've got to be made new constantly. There's way too much great stuff out there. In January, my brother asked me this question. He's the second oldest. I'm the oldest. He's the second oldest. And, that guy drives me nuts sometimes. This is on the internet, too. He asked me this question. He goes, in his experience in church and growing up, that there's the content, which is knowing more about Jesus, and there's the process, which is becoming more like Jesus. And he asked me, he goes, which one do you think you spent more time doing? And I went, I hate you. Because I know a ton of content, right? I know a ton of content. And it's valuable to know content. I'm not trying to say it's not. But I think that there's a balance to be had between these two. And at least for me, I've emphasized the content way more than I've emphasized the process. And I think there's danger in that. Matter of fact, sometimes my knowledge of content prohibits my process. Because I know Jesus loved people that were difficult to love, but they disagree, some of those difficult people, with what I know to be true of Jesus. And so therefore, I'm not having it. No, we're different. I can't know. This is a dividing, the content I have, the content you have, they're different, so therefore I cannot treat you how Jesus would. And I think when that begins to happen, when content trumps process, things are dangerous. I would also say, though, that when process trumps content, we also have a problem. There's a balance to be had. Does that make sense? Here's my question to you. Which one have you emphasized more recently? Because I think both are important. I'm doing the same thing I did last service. I'm like running out of time. I think it's really important to find the balance between these two. Here's the next thing I've learned. The importance of humor. When was the last time you laughed so hard you couldn't breathe? You ever done that thing with your group of friends and somebody happens something and you start laughing and you're laughing, you can't breathe, people are crying, somebody has to pee, it's a whole thing, and then eventually it dies down and someone will say one word. The seal! And everyone's right back in it, right? You ever done that? Stephen Colbert has this to say, you can't laugh and be afraid at the same time of anything. If you're laughing, I defy you to be afraid. Normally, when I'm at church, I actually kind of try to go to some lengths to protect how old I am. I don't really volunteer that information. If someone says something that's before my time, I just say nothing. But since it's kind of on the screen and out in the open, I figured I'd just be fully vulnerable today. I want to show you my favorite funny YouTube video of all time. And it's 14 seconds long, and it's really dumb. But we're going to watch it because I'm in control. I think that's the 600th time I've watched that video, and it still is funny every time to me. Sometimes we just need to laugh. There is great health that comes and great perspective that can be gained sometimes by taking a break from your problems and your fears and just laughing. So I have a couple of things here I don't have slides for. One is this. One thing I've learned is nothing ever takes just 5 minutes. Ever. Oh, just take 5 minutes. Never does. It always takes longer than I think it does. That's all. Here's another thing. You ever heard somebody say this, like some point there was this phrase that got made popular. I can't figure out who started it, but it goes something like, if you love what you do, you'll... I want to meet the person that said that and throat punch them. That is a total lie, right? Every job has some part of it that people don't like. That's why it's called work. That's why they pay you. Because every job has something you don't like. Literally, that's all there was to that. It drives me nuts. The importance of encouragement. Mark Twain said, I can live 2 months on a good compliment. Can you relate? And yet, I think our culture oftentimes, we don't really make a big deal out of complimenting. We make a much bigger deal out of competing. Right? And we can play a role in this by complimenting. By putting more, like complimenting more. My view of God has changed. For a long time, I had an idea of God that I controlled. I could manipulate him with my behavior. He was basically just like a really good version of me. But one of the things I've learned is that God does not fit in my box, and thank goodness. But maybe you can relate. Maybe God's just a superhuman you, and he's not. But because of this, I also bought into this lie that I had to somehow earn God's love or God's approval. And one of the things I've learned is I don't have to, I already have it. I don't have to do anything to earn God's love or approval. I already have it. He loves me as much as he possibly can in this very moment, based on what I've done in only 31 years, which is not very much. He loves you too. You don't have to do anything to earn it. Another thing I've learned is that there's a difference between Jesus and religion. Religion focuses entirely on all the things, all my shortcomings, all the things I've done wrong. I think Jesus focuses a lot more on loving people. I think that religion can focus a lot more on all the hoops I have to jump through to somehow make it to God. And I think Jesus cares much more about whether I forgive the person that's next to me, whether I love my neighbor. Jesus cares more about that than he does about my sin. I'm convinced. That's what I've learned in 31 years. And Jesus treated people with this thing called kindness. Kindness is having or showing a friendly, generous, and considerate nature, especially to people you don't like. In America, when it comes to kindness, we're primarily concerned with doing one thing with it, and that's weaponizing it. We like to kill people with kindness. But I personally don't believe in killing people with kindness. And I found this graphic, and I don't think you can actually save people with kindness. But I do think that when I'm kind to somebody who doesn't deserve it, maybe I show them a glimpse of how Jesus treats me. Maybe to the people that don't deserve it, when I treat them generously and friendly with a considerate nature that tries to consider what they're going through, maybe, just maybe, they get a new view of Jesus they've never had before. Matter of fact, the Bible talks a lot about kindness. 1 Corinthians 13, which defines love. Love is patient. Love is what? Kind. And then in the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, forbearance. And then what? Kindness. And yet, I've never really spent a lot of time thinking about kindness. So here, I have 2 questions to end today, because you've got to end this somehow. Ben Franklin was famous. He had picked 13 virtues, things he wanted to work on, emphasize for 1 week. 13 goes into 52 4 times, because there's roughly 52 weeks in a year. So he would focus on virtue 1 for 1 week, and then virtue 2 for 1 week. And you with me? And then once he hit 13, he'd start over back at virtue 1. He could go through all the virtues 4 times in a year. His favorite, or his least favorite one, was humility, because every time he was good at it, he wasn't. These are the things that I've talked about this morning. And I didn't say this at the beginning, and I should have, because I forgot. I'm not telling you the things that I've learned out of some mastery. These are just things I've noticed that I'm not very good at, and things that I think are worth potentially trying to emphasize. And so my question 1 is this. If you could emphasize one of these this week, which one do you need to emphasize the most? Do you need to emphasize maybe getting better at asking questions, or asking more questions, talking less and questioning more? Do you need to be better at asking people for help? I'm 12 days before Mexico. This is the thing I need to emphasize the most right now. I've got to be better at asking for help. Do you need to learn how to live at peace with others? And that doesn't just mean avoiding people, even though that's easy. Do you need to focus more on the process of becoming like Jesus this week? Do you need to focus more on being encouraging this week or complimenting this week? Do you need to focus more this week on Jesus and less on some of the religious rules? Maybe this week you just need to focus on the simple thing of being kind. I don't know what it is, but I do know this. I don't believe in talking just for the sake of talking. I've shared my experience with you in part with the hope being that maybe you get some fresh perspective and maybe there's something in here you should emphasize this week. Here's the last question I have. If somebody made you do this, what would you say? In your fill-in-the-blank years, what have you learned? If you had to do this very thing, if you had to do it for your children or do it for your friends, what would you say? What have you learned? I don't know. I can't answer it for you. These are some of the things I've learned. My hope is that they've given you some fresh perspective on something. Let's pray together, can we?